Today we will look at Josefa Baca, her life and legacy, an 18th century woman who lived south of the Via of Albuquerque in an area known as Pajarito. 275 years after her death, Josefa has lived on. The Gutierrez Hubble House is a testament to the family that holds her name. This South Valley along the Rio Grande area to this day has descendants from Josefa Baca's family. Women of the 18th century Spanish colonial era had legal rights that many English women in the colonies of America could only dream of. And so let's take a look at how Josefa became a New Mexico legacy. Roads generally serve some purpose. Trade routes for Native Americans, mercantile businesses, arms and armies for soldiers, people and their family. All of these are connections. The Camino Real connected Santa Fe with Mexico City and more. It is a relationship like a family, one belonging to the other. When Juan de Oñate headed north, no one thought that they would return back to Mexico. It was an adventure, a way to improve one's status or wealth. It was a way of getting some elbow room for your family. The push and pull of immigration. Some of New Mexico's oldest European families came in 1598. Many left, and around 14 to 15 families remained. Those families end up making the greatest family groups and connections in that early colonial period. They are international people traveling and using an international road. This road and these families will continue to work their magic for the next 250 years, if not longer. Names such as Archuleta, Baca, Cruz, Griego, Marquez, Martin, Serrano, Pedraza, Perez de Bustillo, Robledo, Romero, Varela, and Vasquez are all names we recognize or have heard about, and these families are what made Santa Fe a destination in 1598. From Spain, we have the Robledos, Archuletas, Pedraza, Varela, Vasquez, Moran, Griego, Carvajal, Cadimo, Hinojos, and Romeros. New Mexico has long been touted as being remote, far too removed from the powers that be in Mexico City. Yet we have the oldest documents in the United States, and they portray people from every walk of life, occupations, and their general daily life. Once a person examines these documents up close and puts them into perspective, New Mexico doesn't look so remote. Some of those comments don't make sense anymore. New Mexicans had the means, the goods, the know-how to live full lives, travel, trade, communicate as any other community under Spanish control. Using wills, sacramental records, governor's papers, and more, New Mexico's history and its people come alive, and the trails they use to maintain their wealth, status, and knowledge become a viable institution unto themselves. For without the people, there would be no use for the trails, and we would have no legacies. From Mexico City, we have the families of Cruz, Baca, and Perez de Bustillo. From Zacatecas, we have the Martin Serranos, who later became Martinez, while Oñate himself would be counted amongst the Zacatecas group. Not only do we have the international set, but we have the locals, native Indians who also traveled north. Most of the Spaniards did not bring a wife or intended bride. They married the local women. Hence, the Camino was a road for blended families and what later would be known as mestizaje. Their colorful homes, patios, and cobbled streets were all left behind. This is a picture or the pictures of Zacatecas. They would have passed through here and seen some of the things that they might have left behind when they first came north. Their aqueducts, their churches with flying buttresses, cathedrals, and schools. And even today, Zacatecas has a very colonial feel in the ambiance when you're there. Parral, although not on the map yet when they came north in 1598, would later be stopping place and another place departing for people that wanted to come to New Mexico. Parral itself is a heavy mining district. During the 16 and 1700s, we do have families such as the Gallegos that came from that area. Again, another town that has a very colonial feel to it. Um, and in fact, Josefa Baca's grandfather, Cristobal Baca, died in April of 1697 in Peral. So again, these people were using the Camino Real to trade, do business, and maybe even meet up with family. In 1600, Cristobal Baca came to New Mexico with the relief column of Captain Villagra. The muster roll or revista gives the following description. Cristobal Baca, legitimate son of Juan de Vaca, native of the city of Mexico, good stature, features, swarthy, 33 years old, with arms. His wife, Ana Ortiz, was the daughter of Francisco Pacheco. She was also a native of Mexico City. They brought their 3 daughters, Juana de Zamora, Isabel, and Maria de Villarrubia, and a boy, Antonio. So this is the Zocalo in Mexico City, and part of what they would have left behind, the Plaza de Armas, the cathedral, much larger plaza than we would have in Santa Fe or Albuquerque today. So the Baca family in itself that came in 1600, they came with their children, their household goods, and arms to defend themselves. They would continue to have a few more children. Cristobal Baca and Ana Ortiz honored their family and children, making sure they would marry into the 1598 families that came with before them. Some of them came in the 1600s. So some people ask, why do I always research Bacas? Well, the women in this family are amazing. The men are merchants, soldiers, farmers. The family came from Mexico City, heads to Santa Fe, and later on during the Spanish Trail times, they moved to a place in California called Bacaville. Their families are large and their strength is in numbers. They own land grants, they have places named after them, and they are proud people. You can hardly not be related to them if you are at least a 4th generation New Mexican. The Camino Real was made for this family, and they knew how to traverse it, make their wealth from it, and yet are humbled by these roads many of them traveled. The family in the 17th century was made up of the children of Cristobal Baca and Ana Ortiz. La familia en el siglo XVII se formaron de los hijos que vinieron con sus padres, Cristobal Baca y Ana Ortiz. They spelled their name Vaca with a V, and in this document, Antonio Vaca was still signing his name that way by 1630, 1640. Tragedy would come to this family. The Baca family sided with the Catholic friars of New Mexico, where the other half sided with the governor in his control. Many of the family members were beheaded. This depicts the ancestry of Josefa Baca, her antepasados. Josefa, born in 1685 in Juarez, today's Juarez, El Paso del Norte. Her father, Captain Manuel Baca, and her mother, Maria Hurtado Salazar, and her grandparents, Captain Cristobal Baca y Ana Moreno de Lara. Would she have known them? Absolutely. This is a family that has long lives, so why not? One of the things I'd like to point out is her dad and grandpa both have the name Captain. If you're an alcalde mayor, you would take that title. If you were head of the local militia, you could use that title. And if you were a presidio soldier, those people also had rank. And so I'm going to talk just a little bit about the presidio soldiers. They maintained the guard on the Camino Real. These early roads would later become main thoroughfares for people that traveled of all kinds, not only just military, but travelers, priests, merchants. So they not only guarded the road, they maintained them. I call them jack of all trades. They were not just a farmer with a weapon, but a frontiersman, a fighter, loyal to crown and country. They defended their homeland. Hundreds of these men served in Santa Fe, yet we know some of them only by name, some have wives, some have children. Many of these men served more than their 10 years, some as many as 40 years. And again, without these early families, the protection from the presidio soldiers was well done by the Baca family. They used the road in between the trade caravans as missives or mail needed to get back to Mexico City. Imagine riding with just a few men to deliver a letter to the viceroy in the mid-1600s. and turning right around and heading north again with the reply to the governor of New Mexico. This depicts sort of a picture of what a soldier might have had on his horse. They were cavalry soldiers, a lance, a shield, maybe a gun, a pistol, artillery of other kind, bullets. On the left are the lists of men that all have the Baca name that served at the presidio of Santa Fe. The majority of these Baca men were redheads or chestnut colored, as their enlistment documents state. They have blue eyes or light gray eyes. Many have thin beards, which were typical of the soldiers of that day. La mayoría de estos soldados tenían pelo rojo y ojos azules. Podemos asumir que las hijas tenían el mismo color de cabello y ojos. What this tells us is also the daughters of these families were more likely redheaded with light eyes. So again, a long list of soldiers with the Baca surname. Josefa Baca was born in 1685 in Juarez, El Paso del Norte. We know little about her early life. She is the daughter of Manuel Baca. One of her sons is named Manuel, so she used that naming pattern. And her family, her parents, were one of the founding families of the Villa de Albuquerque, as you would say then, with 2 R's. She was also a mother. These are her children, Antonio, Manuel, Rosa, Jose, Isabel, and Diego Domingo. So she had these 6 children, and she did what all mothers do at that time. You teach your kids to farm, to ranch, to participate in the community. Something else that she would have done, and we've only really found one record so far, was act as a godmother or a madrina with a spouse, a brother, father, and so on. We find very few records with her in them. But it would be an honor to be asked to be a madrina, because someone would respect that if something happened to the parents, that you would take on the role of caregiver, teaching them the Catholic faith, raising them, and just being a good role model to those people. Women were largely involved in the baptisms, marriages, and deaths in their families. For a baptism, the birth mother stayed at home, as cultural taboos would not have permitted her to leave the house for a number of weeks. The child would have been taken by the godparents or padrinos and been baptized. By this time, the godmother would have made a special gown for the new baby. The fiesta afterwards would have been prepared by the women in the family. A lot of times there's cultural norms. The godparents could have been the husband's parents for the first child. The second child might have been the wife's parents. Then you start having the siblings, the aunts and uncles. With these close family ties, cousins and such would play that role. Women's roles in baptism strengthen the familial bond, not only with their own children, but with their nieces and nephews. We can thank them for our families and traditions. The same can be said for marriages. The bridal dress, headwear, possibly a rosary and other items would have all been made or purchased. A bride might have worn a cloak or mantilla with 7-point lace, silk stockings, and a pair of slippers, all worked on by her mother, her madrinas, or her sisters. In colonial times, weddings took place rather quickly. Banns would have been posted 3 times, sometimes 3 days in a row, and then the couple would have been married. Again, the extended family unit all playing a role in this celebration. Here we have a baptism record of August 1734, where Josefa Baca and her son, Antonio, the Captain Antonio Baca, he's an alcalde mayor, are the padrinos for her granddaughter, Agustina Padilla. This record is in Isleta, and most of the records for Pajarito and that part of that southern area of Albuquerque are actually in the Isleta records. Using wills and probate records in your research can also help answer some questions regarding death, heirs, how many spouses they might have had, if they had children at all. They tended to do these on their deathbed. All their goods and items they owned, even used clothing, animals, mules, horses. And so it gives you another idea of how they would have lived their lives. And wills were not just for the rich people. Everyone from all classes of life in New Mexico in the colonial period produced a will or not. And sometimes in the death record, written in the church books, it will say dejó testamento or no testo, meaning they did not leave a testament. Josefa Baca died in 1746. These are copies of part of her will. Aquí tenemos su testamento que nombra a sus 6 hijos. In her will, she names her 6 children, her house, animals, goods, and her Catholic devotion. Josefa Baca is a 5th generation New Mexico. And this is really where we learn more about her life. Josefa Baca states that she declares in the will she's frail and miserable and a sinner. She had 6 children, who she names as Antonio, Josefa, Domingo, Manuel, Rosa, Isabel, and they all share their inheritance equally. In colonial New Mexico, equal shares were left to the children. If she had been married at the time of her death, her spouse would have received half of what they gained during their marriage. Her dowry would remain hers to keep and leave to her children. The lack or no mention of a husband implies her children were born illegitimate. Maybe that is why she mentions in the will that she is frail, miserable, and a sinner. In New Mexico, this status in the early 1700s did not stop her from creating wealth, owning land, sheep, and acting in colonial society. Josefa's children all married well, and 2 of her sons became alcalde mayores. Josefa did not lead a bad life, just one without a husband. Earlier documents about the land grant of her father indicate she was married to a Garcia. Yet there is no other information that tells us who he is, what happened to him, and why she never mentioned him in her will. This is a census in Pajarito, the place where she lived in 1750. This census does not have her because she's already deceased. But as you can see, her son Antonio Baca with his wife, Barbara Baca is Antonio's daughter. Antonio's daughter. We've got Jose Baca, Isabel Baca, Diego Domingo Baca, Manuel Baca. So all these families are living one right after the other. And because she had a house with 18 rooms in it, it could be that they were all living in some form or fashion in this hacienda type of a home. Feels more like to me a Baca compound. The one missing here is Rosa Baca with her husband, and they're living in Albuquerque. A second census in 1790, also known as a padrón, shows the people of Pajarito. So we have Polonio Baca, her granddaughter, the Peñas who married into the family, the Guterreses that married into the family. Antonio Baca's in household 458. He's 84, ill, and a widower. That is Josefa's son. So again, people still living in this compound known as the Pajarito, as I call it, the Pajarito legacy, 2 generations later in this census. So this is a Google Earth photo that you can see the plots of land, or suertes as they're known, broken into sections as they border along the Rio Grande River. All farmlands had an intersection of acequias that would feed off the river in order to farm. So we have acequia madre, the main mother ditch. Today we see a different modern picture of this, but in many ways we can see that the inheritance of land was divided, and the lands along this river are still being used in that format. So the squares, the long length near the river gives people access to actually have the ability to farm. The Gutierrez Hubble house, again, shows the farmland in the back. This is an aerial view. There's farms nearby, sheep grazing, would have been out on the mesa, not actually in the compound itself. So a lot of the sheep that she had in her will would have been taken out to the Rio Puerco or south along the mesas for grazing. But they used the family kitchen gardens close up to the house, or La Huerta, as they're known. Josefa, based on the content of her will, leaves 200 pesos for the celebration or the Función de Nuestra Señora de Dolores. In further looking at the documents, 3 generations later, they are still doing this in this family. On a bright note, one of her great-great-granddaughters, Juliana Gutierrez's father is Nepomuceno de los Dolores. Even the men carry the Dolores name. Over 20 of her descendants within 3 generations use the name Dolores in some form. So Josefa's desire to honor Nuestra Señora de Dolores continued on, at least that we can find, for 4 more generations. In her will, she had 950 head of sheep, 32 female cows, 12 heifers and yearlings, and 17 head of calves. Again, all these would have been grazing out on the plains, the mesas, towards the south and west of the house. Part of what she had in her goods were boxes with locks. Iron was a scarce commodity at that time. Sometimes what you'll see is una caja con cerradura. It had value. Iron had value because it could be repurposed. So when she states that she has a caja with a lock is more valuable than a caja without a lock. She also states that she had a mortar with a handle. So some of the locks you see here in this photo are very ornate. Some are not. The ones to the bottom left are a little bit more plain. They might have locked a gate or a zaguan gate into the hacienda. But these were some of the things that she would have had in her home. She also, a caja like this leather one, would have been used for traveling. Maybe if she took trips up and down the Camino Real or she traveled up to Santa Fe. They are also used for storing clothing. Some of the larger wooden boxes were used for food storage and items in the household. And later on, in further time periods in the late 1800s, people had petaquillas, or a young woman might store things for her marriage so that she would take to her new home. And then those items would be left to their children also. She also had a picture of the infant Jesus that she left to her son, Manuel. And in this, we call them bienes, or goods, in her will. Most of these are painted on cotton or copper. Paper was not a big commodity during this time. Now, this is not something that the photo on the left, which she had, that remained in the family, but it's a good depiction of something that her son Manuel might have received. Her estate valued at 2,184 pesos when she died, after paying 638 pesos for her funeral. Each child received 364 pesos of inheritance, which included livestock, land, and household goods. Doesn't sound like a lot of money, but it was about $75,000 in today's money. Not shabby at all. And that includes, all the sheep and everything else that she had. These photos here on this slide actually show that each person signed for their inheritance so that they were satisfied, that they got what was told that they were going to get. And this is part of just the whole probate estate dealings that go on. Rosa Baca, her daughter, who had married Miguel Lucero, received a dowry when she married in 1729. Her dowry was 100 ewes or sheep and 10 cows. And then later, when her mother Josefa died, 100 ewes would have been given to her at that time. And then part of the inheritance from her mother is that each child also received 100 pesos from the estate. So these women in the family brought a lot of wealth to a marriage. So Miguel Lucero was pretty lucky that he married an heiress who could bring sheep, cows, money, land to the marriage. And not only for that, but for their children that they had together. In this case, we know of 8 known children. Josefa Apolonia Baca, named after her grandmother, is a 7th generation New Mexican and a descendant of Cristobal Baca and Ana Ortiz also. She lived all her life in the Pajarito area of New Mexico with her parents and on the Camino Real. Their hacienda, which, as they called her, Polonia, inherited, had 18 rooms, a chapel, a sacristy, and a store. Juana married Clemente Gutierrez, the Spaniard from Aragon, and they made their home in this Pajarito area of New Mexico, in this hacienda that she inherited. Clemente Gutierrez is well known for his merchant business and his wealth. When they married, she was 19 and he was 39. Now, one of the peculiar things about this couple is they both had wills, and they never state anything at all about what Clemente brought to the marriage. And so she was really the one that came with all the wealth. He might have known how to become a merchant and used the money they had together to build that business even bigger. But without her wealth, I don't know that he would have been able to do that. Josefa's dowry, this is her granddaughter, had 1,000 head of sheep, 25 mules, mares, stallions, and then this 18-room house. She had over 100 pieces of clothing that she would have taken into the marriage. Oftentimes I ask people when I'm doing this live is how many people track all the goods that you brought to your marriage, and very rarely will somebody actually raise their hand. So again, this was something that she would have brought the wealth into the marriage. He made the connection, and all of a sudden he becomes part of this larger Baca clan. And so I always tell people Clemente Gutierrez just really had to walk in the door. The families, because of where they lived, likely had a pharmacy or a way to heal in their home. On the right side is a 18th century pharmacy, kind of with jars, the mortar and pestle. In this case, the jars are made of Talavera poblana pottery, or as they're known, pottery. Ceramic pots also came on the Manila galleons into Acapulco and made their way north. Colonial candlestick, that's a very Baroque looking one. Towards the end of the 1750 period there. We don't know if it would have been that ornate in her house or not. Again, jars to hold things, to hold food, to hold herbs, anything like that would have been part of the house and the hacienda. Items that you might have seen in the Baca household would also include baskets with food, beans. In this case, here's some pomegranates. I don't know if they would have brought them north from, let's say, Chihuahua City. Smaller boxes with other goods in them. Piñon was a hot topic commodity then. Talavera or Majolica pottery with plates, bowls, pitchers. And then the top right photo is a larger wooden box or caja with a lock on it. And those tended to be more for food storage. So you will see those at places like Rancho de las Golondrinas. I think the Hubble House has some. So you can actually see how much food could be stored in there. These people had large families. Some more items that they might have had. There's a woman in this picture here on the left with a style of dress, with pearls, with earrings, all typical of stuff that Josefa Baca's daughters might have worn. Her granddaughters for sure had and owned. She also had a gold and emerald cross with earrings in one of the wills of the girls, silver cross with cheap stones, fine pearls with silver clasps, uneven fine pearls. These all would have come from the Orient, the Philippines. They had noted 3 dress skirts with gold and silver edging. And in Clemente Gutierrez's will, he stated they had an ebony bed with a mattress and blankets. On the right side is a bed from that time period, but this one's made out of mahogany. So when he says ebony, I'm not sure if he meant mahogany or not. As for chocolate, the ultimate treat, sometimes they have like a box of chocolate. In this case, they had 211 pounds of chocolate as a separate line item. People made chocolate. They had chocolate pots, chocolate frothing jars to do this as a morning drink. They had tables, boxes, and carpet. So again, living a life that many people don't realize might have taken place in the colonial period of New Mexico. By the end of the 1800s and 10 generations later, the Gutierrez Baca lineage has entered now into a new era. Another descendant of Josefa's, Juliana Gutierrez, married Santiago Hubble, another merchant. They remain in the hacienda and use the same storefront as her grandparents did in the 1700s. In looking at this family, they not only utilize the Camino Real, but the Santa Fe Trail. They also utilize the Spanish Trail. And even today, we go forward into I-40. And again, the family merchant blood ran in their veins. And that happened for more than 250 years. At the bottom here, I put the lineage of Josefa to Antonia to Josefa Apolonia Baca, who married Clementa Gutierrez, Lorenzo Gutierrez, who took over, his son, and so on and so forth down to Juliana. And these are parts of the Gutierrez Hubble house that we have today in Pajarito. Well, there isn't enough time to talk about every detail or the whole legacy of Josefa and her family. But we New Mexicans today are proud of our ancestry. Our ancestors blazed trails, they made families, they left legacies. These trails they used to get here combined are many thousands of miles, with many thousands of people who have traveled on them. New Mexicans are great preservationists. You can walk down the street and be on the Camino Real and the Santa Fe Trail almost at the same time. You can venture north to Taos and Abiquiu and find these rutas that thousands of people have used before us today. You can see the same blue sky as Oñate, Cristobal Baca, and Josefa Baca and their descendants have seen for centuries. And if not for these people that made New Mexico their home, these trails and caminos, our towns and cities, would be called something else. New Mexicans have always found a destination here. 1598 opened the door up for them. As for Josefa Baca, an 18th century woman of mystery, of means, a futuristic woman, and an ancestor to thousands of New Mexican people, let's honor her and her legacy. Thank you very much.